My girlfriends think you're pathetic, and honestly, they're absolutely right. I never thought I'd hear those words from my own wife, but there I was, standing in our rented duplex kitchen in Baltimore, watching Nicole deliver them with the precision of a surgeon and the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting months to finally speak her truth. The evening had started normally enough. I'd come home from a long day installing water heaters in cramped basements, showered off the day's grime, and was reviewing our monthly expenses when I noticed something that made me pause. The conversation had started simply enough. I'd noticed a $420 charge on our credit card for designer boots she'd bought as a gift for her friend's baby shower, and as someone who makes $26 an hour fixing pipes and unclogging drains throughout the Baltimore metro area, that kind of expense represented nearly 2 full days of crawling through tight spaces and dealing with other people's plumbing disasters. I wasn't angry when I brought it up at our scratched wooden kitchen table that Tuesday evening, just confused about why she'd spend what amounted to our grocery budget for 3 weeks on someone else's celebration without mentioning it first. Nicole had been washing dishes when I asked about the charge, her manicured hands moving mechanically through the soapy water while her entire body language shifted into something defensive and hostile in a way that immediately told me this wasn't going to be a simple discussion about budgeting priorities. She turned around slowly, dish towel still clutched in her hands like she was preparing for battle, and I could see something dangerous and calculated building behind her eyes, the kind of look that meant this conversation was about to become much bigger than designer baby shower boots and venture into territory I wasn't prepared to navigate. What happened next wasn't just an argument about money or spending priorities. It was the moment my 12-year marriage revealed its true foundation, and it wasn't what I'd thought we'd been building together all this time in our modest duplex with its leaky faucets that I'd fixed myself and the outdated appliances that we'd been slowly replacing as our budget allowed. Nicole didn't just explain the purchase or defend her choice with a reasonable explanation about friendship obligations or special circumstances. Instead, she launched into a character assassination that had clearly been brewing for months, maybe years, starting with how mortified she felt when her friends asked what her husband did for a living and she had to admit that I was just a plumber who worked for a small contractor. She explained with devastating clarity how Kevin, her friend Rachel's husband who works as an investment banker in downtown Baltimore, makes more money in quarterly bonuses than I see in 3 years of steady employment, and how another friend's spouse had just made partner at his prestigious law firm while I was still crawling under houses for a living like some kind of manual laborer who never evolved past his high school education or developed any real professional ambitions. The venom in her voice when she said those words, crawling under houses, made it crystal clear she'd been rehearsing this speech in her head for a very long time, probably every time she had to explain to her social circle why her husband couldn't afford the expensive restaurants they frequented or the luxury vacation destinations they preferred. I stood there in our modest kitchen with its discount store placemats and second-hand dinette set, listening to her describe in excruciating detail how mortifying it was when her girlfriends asked about my career goals, how she'd started making elaborate excuses for why I couldn't join them for their expensive dinner parties or weekend spa trips to Virginia Beach, how she'd been covering for what she perceived as my inadequacies as a provider for so long that she'd almost convinced herself it was normal to be married to someone so fundamentally beneath her social expectations and professional aspirations. The kitchen felt like it was shrinking around us as Nicole continued her detailed explanation of my failures as a husband, my apparent lack of ambition, my contentment with what she called a lower-middle-class lifestyle that made her friends pity her behind closed doors at their book clubs and wine tastings. She wasn't shouting or crying or losing control. This was worse somehow, delivered with the calm certainty of someone stating obvious facts about the weather or the color of the sky, like my shortcomings were so apparent that even pointing them out felt redundant. What struck me most wasn't just the cruelty of her words, though they cut deep enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about our relationship, but the obvious relief in her voice as she finally said what she'd been thinking, the satisfaction of someone who'd been carrying a secret burden of shame and had finally set it down right on top of me instead of continuing to carry it herself. While Nicole spent Thursday evening packing her designer luggage for her annual spa weekend in Virginia Beach with the same judgmental friends who apparently found my existence so amusing, I was methodically planning the most important project of my adult life, extracting myself from a marriage that had revealed itself to be built on shame and social climbing rather than love and partnership. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was practically giddy with excitement about spending 3 days at an expensive resort complaining about her pathetic husband to women who thought she'd married beneath her social class, while I sat in our living room making phone calls that would fundamentally reshape both our futures. I started with Rodriguez, my supervisor at the plumbing company, explaining that I needed to transfer to their Baltimore County branch immediately due to personal circumstances that required me to relocate across town, and fortunately he understood without requiring detailed explanations since he'd been through his own messy divorce 5 years earlier. The transfer would be effective Monday, which gave me exactly the window I needed to execute my plan while Nicole was getting facial treatments and complaining to her spa companions about how mortifying it was to be married to someone who worked with his hands for a living. My brother Samuel in Annapolis had always said I could crash at his place if I ever needed to get away from what he diplomatically called my complicated home situation, and when I called him Thursday night to take him up on that standing offer, he didn't ask questions beyond when I needed him to clear out his spare bedroom and whether I required help moving my tools and equipment. Samuel understood family loyalty in ways that Nicole's social circle apparently never would, and hearing his immediate offer of support reminded me what genuine relationships actually looked like when they weren't built on judgment and status comparisons. I spent the rest of Thursday evening systematically going through our shared belongings and making mental inventories of what belonged to me versus what Nicole had purchased for her vision of the home we should have, which turned out to be a surprisingly easy distinction since she'd always preferred spending money on decorative items that reflected her taste while I'd focused on practical purchases like tools, electronics, and the furniture pieces that actually served functional purposes. The methodical process of cataloging my possessions felt strangely therapeutic, like I was finally taking inventory of who I really was versus who Nicole had been trying to convince me I should become over the past 12 years of marriage. Friday morning brought Nicole's departure for her weekend of luxury treatments and husband-bashing sessions, and as I watched her load her expensive luggage into her car while chattering excitedly on the phone about spa reservations and dinner plans, I realized she had no idea she was essentially celebrating the end of our marriage with the very people who'd helped engineer its destruction. She kissed me goodbye with the distracted affection of someone checking off a routine obligation, already mentally at the resort where she'd be free to express her true feelings about our life together without having to pretend she respected the man who made it financially possible. After her car disappeared around the corner, I called Samuel to confirm our moving plans for Saturday morning, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat in complete silence in my own home and actually enjoyed the peace that came from not having to worry about whether my presence or my profession or my income level was somehow disappointing the person who was supposed to be my closest partner in life. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a well-planned construction project, and by 8 o'clock Samuel and 2 of his friends were backing their pickup trucks into our driveway while Nicole was probably enjoying her complimentary spa breakfast and preparing to spend her day getting pampered with treatments that cost more than I made in a week. The systematic removal of my possessions felt oddly satisfying, like finally completing a renovation project that had been stalled for years due to unclear specifications and a client who kept changing her mind about what she actually wanted the finished product to look like. We started with my tools and equipment, the foundation of everything I'd built professionally: my pipe threading machine, my snake augers, my collection of wrenches and fittings that represented 12 years of careful investment in quality equipment that would last a lifetime if properly maintained. Samuel handled my electronics while his friends Mike and Tony tackled the furniture I'd purchased over the years, including the leather recliner I'd saved up 6 months to buy and the solid oak dining table I'd found at an estate sale and refinished myself during weekends when Nicole was out shopping with her judgmental social circle. Every item we loaded into those trucks represented something I'd chosen and paid for with money I'd earned through honest work, and watching them disappear into the truck beds felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had somehow gotten lost in the daily reality of living with someone who saw my contributions as inadequate rather than valuable. The house looked deliberately incomplete rather than ransacked when we finished, with empty spaces that told a story about what happens when someone mistakes marriage for a renovation project where one person does all the actual work while the other person complains about the results and dreams about hiring a different contractor. Nicole's designer furniture and decorative accessories remained untouched because they represented her vision of who we should be rather than any shared investment in our actual relationship, and I had no interest in taking things that had never really belonged to both of us anyway. I placed a simple note on our kitchen counter where she'd be sure to find it when she returned from her weekend of luxury treatments and husband-shaming sessions, just 8 words that summarized everything she needed to know about the new reality she'd created through her honesty about my inadequacies. The note simply said, "Hope your friends find this punchline hilarious too," which felt like the appropriate response to someone who'd spent our entire marriage treating me like entertainment for her social circle rather than a partner worthy of basic respect and consideration. By noon, 12 years of marriage fit neatly into 2 truckloads, and as we pulled away from the duplex that had never really felt like home anyway, I experienced something I hadn't felt in years, the lightness that comes from no longer carrying the weight of someone else's disappointment and shame about your existence. Samuel commented that I seemed calmer than he'd expected for someone whose marriage had just ended, and I realized he was right because this didn't feel like an ending so much as finally acknowledging a truth that had been obvious for months or maybe years. The drive to my new temporary residence in Annapolis felt like traveling toward possibility rather than running away from failure, and for the first time since Nicole had delivered her devastating honesty about my pathetic nature, I found myself looking forward to discovering what my life might look like when shared with people who valued rather than merely tolerated my presence. Sunday evening brought Nicole's return from her weekend of luxury treatments and social validation, and according to Samuel, who fielded the initial wave of her panicked phone calls, she walked into our half-empty duplex around 7 o'clock expecting to find me waiting with dinner prepared and possibly an apology for questioning her expensive gift-giving habits. Instead, she found strategic empty spaces where my life used to be and a kitchen counter note that apparently sent her into an immediate spiral of confusion, anger, and what sounded like genuine disbelief that someone she described as pathetic would have the backbone to actually leave rather than accept her assessment of his inadequacies. The first voicemail arrived 23 minutes after she presumably discovered my note, and her voice carried the breathless quality of someone who'd just experienced a completely unexpected plot twist in what she thought was a predictable story about a grateful husband who understood his place in the social hierarchy. She wanted to know if this was some kind of joke or dramatic gesture designed to get her attention, because surely I understood that marriage meant working through problems rather than running away like a child who couldn't handle adult criticism about his career limitations and professional shortcomings. The second message came an hour later with a noticeably different tone, as the reality began settling in that my tools were gone, my furniture was missing, and my clothes had vanished from the closet we'd shared for over a decade. This time she sounded genuinely confused about why I would choose to abandon our home and our shared life over what she characterized as a simple disagreement about household expenses and her honest assessment of my standing among her social circle. By message 3, delivered around midnight while I was peacefully sleeping in Samuel's spare bedroom, Nicole had progressed to the bargaining phase of what was clearly becoming a psychological journey through the stages of losing something she'd never properly valued until it was no longer available. She acknowledged that maybe her words had been harsher than necessary, though she stopped short of actually apologizing for the content of her character assassination, and she suggested we could discuss counseling or find ways to work on the communication issues that had apparently caused me to overreact to her constructive feedback about my career trajectory. The fascinating progression continued through Monday with increasingly desperate attempts to reach me at work, messages that revealed how little she'd understood about the man she'd been married to for 12 years, because she genuinely seemed to believe this was a temporary tantrum that would resolve itself once I'd had time to calm down and accept her perspective on our relationship dynamics. I listened to each voicemail with the detached curiosity of someone observing a psychological experiment, noting how her narrative shifted from confusion to anger to bargaining without ever quite reaching the stage of genuine self-reflection about her role in creating the situation that had led to my strategic departure from her life. As Nicole's crisis deepened over the following weeks with mounting bills she couldn't cover on her retail salary and the looming threat of eviction from our duplex that required both our incomes to maintain, her previously supportive friend group began distancing themselves in ways that revealed the shallow foundation of relationships built on shared judgment rather than genuine loyalty or affection. Rachel, the friend whose investment banker husband Kevin had been held up as the gold standard of masculine success during Nicole's kitchen assassination of my character, suddenly stopped responding to text messages and became mysteriously unavailable for their usual coffee dates when Nicole needed emotional support rather than an audience for her complaints about married life. The same woman who had encouraged Nicole to view me as professionally inadequate apparently had no interest in providing practical help or genuine friendship when her circumstances shifted from comfortable superiority to actual need for assistance and understanding. Kevin's wife Lisa, who had previously enjoyed their group sessions of comparing husbands and finding mine lacking, discovered urgent scheduling conflicts every time Nicole suggested meeting for drinks or dinner, and her social media posts about girls' nights and weekend activities conspicuously excluded any mention of Nicole despite months of shared activities and mutual social climbing aspirations. The spa weekend friends who had painted Nicole as tragically married beneath her social station proved unwilling to provide the kind of support that actually matters during personal disasters, because apparently their friendship had been built on the entertainment value of her marital dissatisfaction rather than any genuine care about her well-being or happiness. What Nicole discovered during her weeks of increasing desperation was that friendships founded on shared superiority and mutual validation of questionable life choices don't translate into the kind of loyalty that shows up when someone actually needs help rather than an audience for their grievances against reality. The women who had spent months encouraging her to see me as an embarrassment to her social aspirations were nowhere to be found when she needed someone to co-sign a lease, lend money for security deposits, or simply provide emotional support during what was clearly becoming a complete restructuring of her adult life. Instead, they seemed to view her sudden descent from comfortable married woman to struggling single person as something contagious that might affect their own carefully maintained social positions, and they protected themselves by creating distance from her crisis rather than demonstrating the kind of friendship that actually matters during difficult transitions. Nicole's social media posts during this period revealed her growing awareness that the relationships she'd prioritized over her marriage had been largely transactional, built on her ability to contribute stories about her disappointing husband and her aspirations for something better rather than any genuine connection or mutual support that could survive changes in her circumstances or social status. After 3 weeks of ignored phone calls, unanswered text messages, and voicemails that progressed from demanding explanations to begging for conversations, Nicole finally arranged what she probably hoped would be a dramatic reconciliation scene by showing up at Samuel's house in Annapolis on a Thursday evening. Arriving in her sister's borrowed Honda Civic with mascara-stained cheeks and a carefully prepared apology speech that she'd likely rehearsed during the 40-minute drive from Baltimore. I opened Samuel's front door to find her standing on the porch clutching a tissue and wearing the kind of defeated expression that was probably supposed to make me forget everything that had led to this moment, but instead reminded me exactly why I'd chosen to rebuild my life without someone who viewed emotional manipulation as a valid communication strategy. She launched into her prepared remarks before I could even invite her inside, explaining through intermittent tears that her words during our kitchen confrontation had been spoken in anger and frustration rather than reflecting her true feelings about our marriage, our shared life, or my value as a husband and provider for our household. According to her revised narrative, the stress of maintaining appearances among her social circle had caused her to say things she didn't actually mean, and she wanted me to understand that her honest assessment of my professional inadequacies had been unfairly influenced by external pressures from friends who didn't really know or appreciate the man she'd married. I listened calmly from Samuel's doorway while she explained that anger reveals character flaws rather than authentic truth, and that the cruel things people say during heated arguments shouldn't be treated as genuine expressions of their deepest beliefs or feelings about their partners. Her argument might have been more convincing if I hadn't spent 12 years watching her carefully edit her public persona while letting her real opinions slip out during unguarded moments, and if her current crisis hadn't been caused entirely by her assumption that I would permanently accept being treated as her shameful secret rather than her equal partner. When she finished her prepared speech and looked at me expectantly for signs of forgiveness or willingness to negotiate our future together, I calmly explained that anger doesn't create new thoughts or feelings, It simply removes the social filters that usually prevent us from expressing what we already believe to be true about other people. Nicole's response revealed that she still fundamentally misunderstood the situation, because she immediately shifted into bargaining mode and began discussing couples counseling, communication workshops, and various therapeutic approaches that might help us work through what she characterized as a temporary relationship crisis rather than the permanent revelation of incompatible values and mutual disrespect. I produced the divorce papers I'd had prepared by a family law attorney in Annapolis, setting them on Samuel's porch railing where she could see them clearly, and explained that respect, once completely destroyed through deliberate cruelty and calculated humiliation, cannot be rebuilt through apologies, therapy sessions, or promises to modify behavior that had been authentic rather than aberrant. Her final desperate arguments about our shared history, the years we'd invested in building a life together, and the marriage vows we'd made in front of our families fell flat against my unshakable understanding that I deserved better than being someone's backup plan, financial safety net, or source of social embarrassment among people whose opinions shouldn't have mattered more than their spouse's dignity and happiness. 8 weeks after Nicole signed the divorce papers with shaking hands and moved back to her childhood bedroom in her parents' modest ranch house while taking a retail position at a department store that paid barely enough to cover her car insurance and student loan payments, I had purchased a modest 2-bedroom townhouse in a quiet Annapolis neighborhood and begun dating Elena Martinez, a fellow contractor I'd met at a plumbing supply store who specialized in bathroom renovations and understood the satisfaction that comes from solving practical problems with skilled hands and quality tools. Our relationship developed naturally through shared professional respect and genuine compatibility rather than social climbing aspirations or attempts to change each other into more acceptable versions of ourselves. And Elena's appreciation for my work ethic and problem-solving abilities created a foundation of mutual admiration that felt revolutionary after 12 years of apologizing for my existence to someone who saw my career as a source of shame rather than honest accomplishment. Elena had built her own successful business through the same combination of technical skill, customer service, and financial discipline that I developed over my career, and our conversations about industry trends, equipment investments, and business growth goals reminded me what it felt like to have a partner who was genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences rather than viewing them as evidence of limited ambition or social inadequacy. The contrast between my new relationship and my former marriage became especially clear when Elena suggested we attend a home improvement trade show together, not because she needed me to pay for expensive entertainment, but because she thought we might both learn something useful and enjoy discussing new techniques and products with other professionals who shared our commitment to quality workmanship and customer satisfaction. Nicole's attempts to reconnect through mutual friends revealed that she had learned nothing meaningful about respect, personal responsibility, or the consequences of treating people as disposable entertainment for social gatherings, because she continued to characterize my departure as an overreaction to honest feedback rather than the predictable result of years of accumulated disrespect and calculated emotional abuse designed to make me feel grateful for her presence in my life. According to the reports I received from people who still maintained contact with both of us, Nicole had developed an elaborate narrative about being the victim of my sudden personality change and unreasonable expectations for marriage, apparently unable or unwilling to acknowledge that asking for basic respect and partnership had never been unreasonable, just incompatible with her vision of our relationship dynamics and social positioning. Meanwhile, Elena and I had begun making plans for combining our businesses into a comprehensive home renovation service that would allow us to tackle larger projects while maintaining the quality standards and customer relationships that had made us both successful as individual contractors. And the excitement of building something meaningful with someone who valued my contributions felt like discovering what partnership was supposed to look like when both people brought genuine respect and shared ambition to the relationship. The best response to being called a joke, I realized while watching Elena expertly install a complex shower system that would have challenged many experienced plumbers, was proving your worth through building a better life with someone who recognized rather than dismissed your talents, skills, and character, and discovering that happiness multiplies exponentially when shared with a partner who sees your success as something to celebrate rather than a threat to their carefully maintained sense of superiority over the person who made their lifestyle financially possible.